Good morning. Just down the road here from here at Hatfield is the birthplace of the jet airliner, the de Havilland Comet. It was a remarkable first. It doubled the speed and the altitude possible for passenger travel. It was smooth and fast and the best of British. It was also remarkable because a series of inexplicable accidents taught us about the dangers of metal fatigue resulting from pressurization, which hadn't been previously suspected. The plane could look fine, but tiny stresses caused microscopic fractures and ultimately sudden, complete structural failure. In one case, the wings fell off. In another, it literally tore itself apart in flight. Something that looked perfect and beautiful was brought down by unsuspected problems deep in the heart of it, things which nobody noticed until it was too late. All planes are safer now because of the hard lesson learned with the Comet. I'd like to keep that in mind because I'd like to come back to that idea later. The message to the church in Thyatira follows the common pattern which we see in these messages at the start of Revelation. First, there's a vision of Jesus in verse 18. Then there is approval, commendation for what the church is doing well in verse 19. That's followed by accusation, a big warning. It's in verses 20 to 23. Then admonition, what they must do next, verses 24 to 25. And finally, a future blessing for those who overcome, verses 27 to 29. Vision of Jesus, approval, accusation, admonition, final blessing, future blessing. Historically, we know so very little about Thyatira. My father-in-law visited the 7 churches in modern-day Turkey, and Thyatira, he said, is the only place where nothing remains of the settlement. We know it as the place of origin of Lydia, the seller of purple, who is saved in Acts 16, verse 14. A small town, a military garrison, but we don't know much more about it. Let's think then about the vision of Jesus. The vision of Jesus here is quite frightening. This isn't the Son of God cuddling a little lamb. It is someone whose eyes are like blazing fire and whose feet are like burnished bronze. Many angel visions in the Bible start with the admonition, do not be afraid. And, well, it's no wonder that John fell at Jesus' feet as though dead when he first sees him in this vision. This isn't gentle Jesus, meek and mild in view here. This is the conquering Messiah, the right hand of God who will reign over all the earth. This is the Messiah of Psalm 2, where it says, kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you be destroyed in your way, for his wrath can flare up in an instant. Or of Revelation 19, who with justice judges and makes war. It's a frightening vision of Jesus. Then we look on at the approval in verse 19, and there is remarkable approval for the church here. The Lord knows their deeds, he knows their love, he knows their faithfulness, their service, their perseverance. Even better, they're not resting on their laurels. They're doing more now than they were at first. They're not like Ephesus, which had lost their first love. In every visible way, they were an exemplary church, flying high, a shining example of what it is to be a Christian church. But, like the Comet airliner we considered at the start, there was a hidden problem at the heart of the church. That brings us to the accusation here. Like at Pergamum, there were problems of sexual immorality and idolatry in the church. Here it is associated with someone identified as Jezebel, someone within the church whose teaching is misleading people into wrong behaviour. They probably weren't actually called Jezebel, but the book of the Revelation refers back to so much to Old Testament themes and images that it's impossible to not think of Queen Jezebel, the wife of Ahab, who led all Israel astray, introducing foreign practices and foreign gods to the nation. Now, we are rarely tempted astray by things which are obviously wrong. We are more likely to be tempted astray when there are elements of the world system around us where we just kind of fit in. We're not talking about one giant compromise with the world, but a pathway of dozens of little compromises. And before we know it, we're in bed with Jezebel. At the time that John was writing, the big threats were sexual immorality and food sacrifice to idols. What might be the threatening areas for us today? Perhaps a love of money, or the normalization of pornography, or a drift away from the necessity of salvation through Jesus alone, and instead accepting a wishy-washy, everyone will get to heaven in their own way. It's difficult to be certain what it means for us today, but then it always is difficult. We can see the problem for other people more easily than we can see the threats for ourselves. There is an admonition here, because as dire as the accusation against the church is, all hope is not lost. In verses 24 to 25, those who are still free from false teaching are asked to hold on to what they have until Jesus comes. Now, this isn't as much a counsel of despair as it might seem at first, because Jesus doesn't finish his message there. He goes on to a vision of the future of the church for those who hold on to the end. And in the future of the church, we see there will be authority over the nations, ruling them with all the authority which the Son of God has and delegated down to them. Now, what does this look like? Honestly, I don't know, but it does make me think of a quote from the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, where the tempter explains that the victim sees the church as a building on the estate with neighbours he would rather not meet. Instead of seeing it as the demons see it, the church, as we see her, spread out through all time and space, rooted in eternity and terrible as an army with banners. The message ends as it begins, with a view of the future which is in God's hands and God's control, with the mighty figure of the risen Christ and the mighty spectacle of his redeemed church. That cosmic spectacle brings home just how tawdry the accusation against Thyatira is. They, like Esau in the Old Testament, attempted to sell their inheritance for a little bit of stew. So in conclusion, as the Comet airliner was brought down by a fatal flaw in the heart of its airframe, yet people learned from that how to build planes that fly safely, let us learn from the fatal flaw at the heart of the Thyatira church. Reject teaching that might bring us into the world at the expense of the gospel, and hold fast to Jesus and his teaching while we wait for Jesus' ultimate victory.